So let's now discuss 4 areas where we especially need to guard and protect our Christian unity. The first is our response to direction from Jehovah's organization. When the COVID-19 pandemic struck in 2020, we all received direction, including new ways to attend our meetings and carry out our ministry, and ways to comply with the secular authorities. Did you disagree? Or did you have a different idea? If so, did you follow the direction anyway and give it your support? If you did, then you contributed to our unity. When we stand together and unitedly follow direction from Jehovah's organization, good things happen. Like what? Like what happened when the first century Christians complied with the direction from the apostles and older men in Jerusalem. Acts chapter 16, verses 4 and 5 says, "As they traveled on through the cities, they would deliver to them for observance the decrees that had been decided on by the apostles and the elders who were in Jerusalem. Then indeed, the congregations continued to be made firm in the faith and to increase in number day by day." Individual Christians and congregations recognized and submitted to the authority of the governing body at that time, the apostles and elders who were in Jerusalem. Did you note the beneficial results? The congregations continued to be made firm and to increase. And that's what happened when you, brothers and sisters, followed the direction regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. We experienced significant increases in meeting attendance. The attendance for the 2021 memorial reached an all-time peak. It is amazing what Jehovah accomplishes when we stand together as one united people.
We're watching governing body member Mark Sanderson giving his talk, Stand Together as One United People, in the May 2022 JW Broadcasting episode. 2 things are happening here in this clip. First of all, Mark Sanderson is pushing this idea that the governing body is biblical, even though the words governing body, or the term governing body, appears nowhere in the Bible. And this is something you don't really think of as a Jehovah's Witness. It certainly made me stop and pause when I heard this said the first time. Oh yeah, those words, governing body, you hear it all the time as a Jehovah's Witness. The governing body says this, the governing body says that. If it's such a big deal to be following the governing body, if God has appointed the governing body as his faithful slave, why is that phrase used nowhere in the scriptures? It is in fact a corporate phrase. It's used all the time in the corporate world, but it's not a biblical term. What Jehovah's Witnesses do, what the faithful slave does, is it takes verses in the book of Acts, specifically referring to a controversy among early Christians surrounding circumcision and whether it should be practiced or not. They take these verses where it describes the apostles and older men and Paul meeting together. I think there are even elders joining from Antioch. So it's not just the apostles and older men. Paul wasn't technically one of the 12. Anyway, the point is, I've made all of these arguments before, and I don't want to repeat myself. So if you happen to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses and you want more information on this particular subject of whether the governing body is biblical, whether the governing body was in fact present in the first century, Tibor will hopefully, if he is gracious, show you a thumbnail for Sushi 23. Tony Morris insists the governing body is biblical. It's a 23-minute video in which I go into all of this in more detail and explain why it cannot be said that there was a governing body in operation in the first century that's referred to in the book of Acts. It's simply not true. Mark Sanderson here is peddling lies when he talks about this. The other really interesting thing is he's talking about COVID-19, and just for context, Jehovah's Witnesses have lost over 20,000 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Mark Sanderson's own father was among them. So Mark Sanderson knows all about how deadly this pandemic has been. Obviously, we all remember that there were precautions put in place governmentally that we all had to follow, and in many places are still following. You know, the pandemic hasn't ended. It's still taking lives as we speak, and precautions still need to be taken. But in many places, precautions are easing up. I don't think I'm saying anything controversial when I say that some Jehovah's Witnesses evidently had problems following the stringent measures that were put in place by the governing body, which incidentally I have repeatedly praised the governing body for. I think it's very responsible that they implemented social distancing, that they didn't have Kingdom Hall meetings, that they didn't get people to go round door to door. I think that's brilliant. But what Mark Sanderson is saying here is that the COVID-19 precautions that the governing body implemented were somehow unique. Clearly they weren't. I've argued in previous videos that if anything, Jehovah's Witnesses were behind the curve when you compare how quickly they responded to the pandemic compared to worldly governments and institutions. But he's making the argument, using this scripture in Acts 16 verses 4 and 5, he's making the argument that because Jehovah's Witnesses cooperated with the governing body's COVID-19 restrictions, the organization prospered.
And that's what happened when you, brothers and sisters, followed the direction regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. We experienced significant increases in meeting attendance. The attendance for the 2021 memorial reached an all-time peak.
Surely the whole point of following these guidelines, of taking precautions in the face of a deadly pandemic, is not so the organization can prosper, is not so that there can be an all-time peak memorial attendance, but so that lives can be saved. I don't understand how he can be so tone deaf here. He knows himself how deadly this pandemic is. He knows himself that Jehovah's Witnesses have died. But because it suits him to exert his authority by, again, pushing this lie about the governing body having authority derived from the scriptures, because it suits his narrative, he has to somehow twist and contort the COVID-19 pandemic into Acts 16 verses 4 and 5, which is talking about the early Christians prospering because they were all in agreement. Of what relevance is an increased memorial attendance? And quite frankly, how can Mark Sanderson boast about increase? Increase means that the religion has increased. In 2020, the religion shrank by 0.6%. In 2021, it grew by 0.7%. So what we have is, I suppose, a net percentage increase of 0.1%, which really is stagnant growth. And in real terms, when you factor in the births and deaths ratio and the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses, when they get to a certain size, are going to increase just by having babies, in real terms, these are utterly underwhelming figures. I'm sorry, the organization cannot be said realistically to have increased. Even Mark Sanderson doesn't want us to think about actual publisher growth. He's instead doing a shady cup and ball trick of talking about increase and then talking about meeting attendance and the attendance of the memorial. Because again, he's a charlatan. He's a trickster. He's interested in manipulating people. So he poses a premise, he makes an argument, and before people have time to reason things through in their heads and think, well, hang on, isn't following COVID-19 precautions all about saving our lives and preventing needless deaths? And how can it be said that the organization increased if the net increase was only 0.1% over 2 years? Before people have time to think about this, he's giving people the answer. We've had, quote unquote, increase because there was an all-time record memorial attendance. And there was an all-time record memorial attendance because Jehovah's Witnesses followed the direction of Jehovah's organization regarding COVID-19.